Hey everyone, I'm Naveed, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to talk about perspective, the what and the why. So, while a lot of us may already be familiar with the fact that perspective is one of the fundamentals of art itself, we need to understand what the term actually means and how it adds value to our creativity and allows us to improve our art style exponentially. Before we get started, please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and let's begin our journey. One thing that all artists need to keep in mind is that the use of perspective can make a vast difference to your visual execution. Of course, perspective is not a standalone element. It has to combine with other elements such as spacing, lighting, composition, proportion, etc. However, it is perspective that lays the foundation of your art by adding value and depth. So, for starters, let's look at the what of perspective. Whenever we hear the word perspective, what is it that first comes to mind? Looking at things from different angles. Simply put, perspective means point of view. Here's two people arguing. They're arguing because they have different points of view. Now, here are the same two people looking at a building from two different distances. Does the building appear to be of the same size to both individuals? No. One of them will see a bigger building from a slightly distorted angle, and the other one will see a smaller version of the same building, but probably a lot straighter. Let's see what happens when the same two people look at the same building from two different angles. How does the person standing at the foot of the building see it? How about the person standing at the corner of the street? So you see, they're looking at the same object from different points of view. That is essentially what perspective is. And now we come to the why of perspective. This is where things start getting really interesting. Whether using a traditional or a digital canvas, we artists typically have access to a two-dimensional plane, which means an x-axis and a y-axis. In contrast to the real world, where we have access to a three-dimensional plane, x, y, and z. Here, I will show you with examples how we can create that additional dimension, which is the z-axis, on a two-dimensional plane to add depth and value in terms of perspective. Now, to keep things simple, we will use a very basic structure to understand how we can use perspective to really add value and depth. Let's consider a simple box. Okay, so this is how a box looks on a two-dimensional canvas, and a very basic layout, which is an x-axis and a y-axis, or in other terms, the width and the height. So it looks pretty much like a basic rectangle, right? It does not look like a box. Now, what we need to do in order to convert this basic shape into a box is to add a third dimension, which is the depth. Now, we can add the depth from different angles. Now that we have designed our basic box by adding depth, for your convenience, I'm going to shade out one of the surfaces of the box. So let's say we are going to shade the bottom base. One interesting thing here is that we have not yet added what we call perspective, because perspective requires something known as the vanishing point. So in order for an image to have a vanishing point, the lines cannot be parallel. So in this case, as you can see, most of our lines are actually parallel, which means that these lines will continue to go on and on infinitely without any possibility of converging, right? And also, in this case, if you look at this image, it might actually give you the impression that the box under depth 1 is actually consisting of a perspective. And let me show you why it does not. So let's say this and this, both of these edges, if we plot out the lines to see if they converge, they do not. How about these two? Sure, this one does converge with this, so it looks like there could be a vanishing point there, but if you look at this edge, it actually keeps going on and it converges here at another vanishing point. And now let's take a look at how adding perspective can change the overall look and dynamics of the box. In this case, the edges of the box can be projected and the lines will converge into a vanishing point. Now, let's create another box from a slightly different angle. As you can see in this case, the edges of the box can actually be projected into 3 different vanishing points, which essentially is a principle of the 3-point perspective. And now for the final part of this video, we are going to try something different. We are going to draw a cityscape from 2 different perspectives. So for the first one, let's sketch in some buildings, establish the skyline, and now add some more buildings in the foreground to create some depth. As you can see here, this is essentially what we call a reverse engineering of the 1-point perspective. So, what happens if we look at the same buildings from a different perspective? In this version, you can essentially show the height of the buildings, the width of the buildings, and the depth of the buildings. And that is the why of using perspective. And that, my friends, is how perspective can change the dynamics of your drawing by adding value and depth. In our upcoming videos, I have an exciting lineup for you, starting with the fundamentals of perspective, how we can combine the elements of the vanishing point, the horizon line, and the perspective lines into perfecting your principles so that we can actually explore together different objects, shapes, environments, and characters. That is where the fun begins. So stay tuned.